the volume of our subject material. I'm going to talk to you about America's foundation, and I guess before I get started, I do want to point out, I can tell I'm in the right place. To have somebody pray in the name of Jesus at the start of a meeting, it's right on.
Amen.
Now, America, for a lot of people, unfortunately, that may make them nervous, and they may think, well, this is a political meeting. Why are they talking about something that is religious, something that is what probably should be, quote, separated from the state? We're going to get to a lot of those things, but as you're going to find out, hopefully in about 3 hours from now, you're going to see that this stuff is at the center of what our country was built on. There's a lot of places I could go.
It's okay, I'm his mom.
Look, your mommy. She didn't show up, but I didn't bring her. I get the gift of gab from that. Yes, sir.
Can we leave the back row light on?
Okay?
Is that okay? Yeah.
It's fine with me.
Yep.
Take notes.
If you travel to Washington, D.C., this is the National Archives building. Anybody know what is housed in the National Archives?
Archives.
Archives of
United States.
our most important documents, and some that aren't all that important, but the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. When you walk through the front door, you'll end up going through a huge vault door. That's about as big as that wall that they open and close every night. Inside that vault is this room. It's very expensive. This is an all marble floor. Along here, there are our most famous and important documents. If you've ever seen the movie National Treasure, that might look a little familiar to you. Underneath bulletproof glass, this gentleman here is looking at the Declaration of Independence. The writing is starting to fade. They have dimmed the lights on it to protect it. But you walk over there, and everybody that goes to visit, this is what you look down on, the Declaration. And the words that contained there, in my opinion, are the most important thing that has ever been written by the hand of man. I say that because the Bible, in effect, was written by the hand of God. Other than that, this is the most important thing that the planet Earth has ever written down. And at the center of that, at the heart of it, what America is this idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Notice the first thing that Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers, they thought there was an objective, observable truth. You didn't have your truth and I had mine. Truth governs everything. And to them, it was self-evident, meaning if you're just an observable person, everybody can see it. Doesn't even take much scratching at the surface. It's evident on its face. And what is that truth? That all men, and that's mankind, we are all created equal. To a lot of Americans, they'll read that and say, well, let's get to the next part. I mean, it kind of sounds like poetry. It's rolling off the tongue pretty good. You need to pause and identify what Jefferson has recognized. All men are created. Thomas Jefferson, our founding fathers, didn't think we crawled out of a swamp. They didn't think we descended from monkeys. Where did they get the idea that we were created? This is important stuff.
From the Bible.
Exactly right. The Bible. We were created. Jefferson and those men were starting a nation. They weren't starting a church. We're going to get a half hour into this and you're going to think, this guy's talking about starting a church. No, sir. This is a civil government, and they started it with this recognition. God created us. And then, what were his intentions for us? They are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator. What's that mean? Endowed by? That means God gave his creation certain rights, expectations for how they should live. That they should live with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This boils down to a religious idea. Jefferson recognized that we were created by God, and then after he created us, God had an intention for us to live how? Freedom and in liberty. Think back with me. God put Adam and Eve in the garden. What did he tell them? There's all these trees you can eat of. I got this one marked over here, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't touch it. The day that you touch it, you will die. Did God put handcuffs on them that day to make sure they wouldn't touch it?
Nope.
He gave them their freedom. Then he walked off. He left them to make their choices. Now, there were consequences. They chose wrong. He came back and he never renegotiated the idea. God never said, I'm taking away your freedom. He did take away the garden. They got kicked out. God put a cherubim with a flaming sword to make sure they couldn't get back in there. And that's what we do today with people who can't be trusted in freedom and liberty. You see, if you're going to have a society, a culture of freedom, of liberty, what kind of people are fit to live in that? A moral and a religious people. What do we do with people who break laws, who destroy other people's property, who rape, who murder, who move boundaries? We put them in jail and we take their freedom away from them because they're not moral enough to exist out there in it. If you're perceptive enough, when you walk out this door in 3 hours, you're going to know something. The Founding Fathers made a country that is only workable with a moral and a religious people. This is why it is so dangerous. If we get God removed from our country,
That's right.
we're dead meat. There's literally no chance.
Right.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created. Before we leave this, this is the start of our country. They started it with this sentence, that God made us. Now, I want to stop thinking, I don't want to offend anybody. We have churches in America now that are less biblical
Oh, yeah.
than that.
That's why we are the way we are now.
Our founding fathers, who the media, our universities tell us what about them? I mean, those guys were atheists, they're godless. Maybe they believed in God, but he's just out there, he doesn't involve himself in our life. You think they thought starting a nation by recognizing him and his creation, you think they think that God's involved with us?
Yep.
You better believe it. God didn't just create us and then walk off. He has an intent for us. And you find that out by reading your Bible. We're going to see just how well the founding fathers knew their Bible. I put those guys up against almost any pastor in America. They made laws from verses that most people don't even know exist in them. I've never heard of them. When I go and give this type of speech to people and we start pulling out Bible verses, they don't even recognize them, that they're in the Bible. The founding fathers knew their Bible well enough that those are the things they pulled out as, we got to put that in our civil government. So they're endowed. What this tells us is this is God's intent. And I am beating this dead horse to start with because it sure sounds like they're kind of starting a church. God's intention for us, and yet they're starting a nation, a civil, some people would call it a secular government. Our civil government is based on a biblical principle from top to bottom. James Madison, he is what some people call the father of the Constitution. He had a ton of input. When they were discussing how are we going to do this, how are we going to keep people free, and yet have a government that can tell them what some things they must do. This is what Madison said. If men were angels, wait a minute. What's it mean if you call a person an angel? You know, if you had a little 2-year-old running around and she's just cute as a doll and you think, well, look at that little angel. What are you saying about that little girl? Yes, she seems perfect. She doesn't even go in her diaper. She never spills anything. She's just perfect. When he says, if men were angels, if men were always perfect, what would we not need? We would not need government. he said no government would be necessary. If angels, if we had perfect people to govern men, you see, we have to at some point, these people are elected, I assume, up here because you chose them. You saw qualities in them that you thought, maybe he hasn't stolen much lately, let's put him in charge of the treasury. You find people that you think are, maybe they're a little angelic, they're kind of as close as we can find. You see, that there's an if here. The founding fathers knew something about human nature, that we are fallen creatures. That thing we talked about in the Garden of Eden, once that happened, who could be trusted? Who could be just implicitly, without oversight, be trusted?
Nope.
Not even George Washington. And as a whole continent, Washington was #1 on that trust list. Even him, they thought, sorry, we can't. Because he's a sinful man, like the rest of us. It's a biblical idea. He said, if angels were to govern men, if we could find somebody perfect, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. You see, if we're going to elect someone and put him in charge of an office, we had better put some guardrails, some conditions, some limitations on the office that he's in. We're done with having kings, where every word that comes out is law, because they're fallen creatures.
Tell Biden that.
It's a biblical idea. In framing a government which is to be administered by men, and you could read that as fallen men, sinful men, because we all are, administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Those guys were so smart. They didn't have any examples. Where'd they get these ideas? They got it out of the Bible. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things. Above all things. Above that dog that just walked in here. You know what he would do if he was left alone with some treats on the table? You know what he would do if there was an opposite sex for him in here? The heart is deceitful above all things. The heart of man, because of sin, that thing can get so wicked that in the most advanced country on earth in the 1940s, they had Bach and Beethoven, they put 6 million people in ovens. You can't trust the heart of man. There is evil in there that you can't imagine. The only reason some of you don't kill your neighbors, you know you'd get caught. The heart is deceitful. It's desperately wicked. Who can know it? The founding fathers knew this, and it's a biblical perspective on life. They had a world view. We don't trust anybody. And it's also why they wanted Christianity infused into the culture. Because what does Christianity do to the human heart?
Makes it new.
Well,
Changes
Christ
it.
changes it, not
Yes.
Christianity, but Christ.
The Bible tells us when a man is born again, all things have become new. It changes even his nature. Doesn't mean he can't sin anymore. Of course he can. But notice what Christianity does to a citizen. It makes him the best possible citizen. Because now he's been told, don't steal from your neighbor, don't kill, don't move the boundaries on the fence posts on your property lines. Don't covet your neighbor such and such. It puts guardrails on his sin nature. What happens if we lose Christianity in America? Then what? The only way to even kind of get close to freedom, they'll have to put a policeman, a constable on every corner. One for every one of us to watch us. And that's not even a good definition of freedom. That's tyranny.
Yes, sir.
Do you see why Christianity, morality, is the basis for a free society? We can't lose that, folks. Any politician that tells us church needs to stay out, you should have more than red flags going on. If the church, its teachings, the true church, if its teachings are not infused in government, it's over. You can't even have freedom without this. John Adams, second president, vice president of Washington, said, "We have no government armed with the power capable of contending with human passions." What are human passions? Lust, greed,
Sex, drugs, rock and roll.
all that stuff, the sin nature. He said our government can't compete with that because we're turning people loose, letting them in freedom go after their own pursuit of happiness. He said that the government is not capable of contending with human passions that is unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. You ever tried netting a whale out of the water? Doesn't work so good. He overpowers it. Adams said that's what happens to our Constitution. It gets torn apart if you put an irreligious people in freedom. They will destroy the Constitution. The Constitution can't work unless the people have a certain morality. Our Constitution is designed only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. You should get chills down your spine at some point. Everything that we do from here and the rest of the 2.5 hours, let it cross your mind just how far have we removed from this? How far down the wrong road are we?
80%.
Our Constitution, we got that one. Isaiah 33:22. Founding fathers read this verse. You'd be shocked how much they got out of this. The Lord is our judge. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. He will save us. In that verse, they saw God revealed to mankind in how many ways? 3 ways. And what are those ways? One, he's a judge. One, that's starting to look familiar to me. A lawgiver. What do you notice in that verse?
3 branches of the government. 3 branches, yeah.
The 3 branches of our federal government.
Now, he will save us shows right in that statement that he is salvation.
That's what he would send. So the judge is the judiciary. The law is the Congress, the legislative branch. And the king,
Exactly.
that's the executive. They didn't just have pizza one night, have a bad dream, and see this. Where did the founding fathers get the idea for our form of government? From the Bible. They got everything from the Bible. The most unique thing on planet Earth is the American government. It's divided up in checks and balances, so there's a little power here, a little over there, so that because we know the heart of man is evil, we can't entrust too much power to one person. And then they wrote a constitution to make sure whoever is in that office, you only get to do about these 4, 5, 6, 8 enumerated things. Those people we send to offices in Lincoln or in D.C., they can't do whatever they want to do. At least they're not supposed to. They're supposed to live within the guardrails. The Capitol building in D.C., a beautiful, beautiful place. This is the House of Representatives. It's where the president gives the State of the Union speech every year. If you'll notice here, these are doors up in the balcony. The balcony goes all the way around, and that's where we took this picture from when we visited there. These doors, you walk down the aisle to sit in these places, look what's above each of those doors. And the resolution on this isn't good enough, but there is a picture of all, these are the people, the ancient people that our government put above all the doors. These are ancient lawgivers through all the ancient cultures since man has been on the earth. And there's one of those that is unique. All of them are a side profile. Do you notice that? See how this person, you see one half of their face, one half. But there's one person that's looking straight on. We see all of him. And that person is Moses. What the founding fathers did when they built our capital was to acknowledge that the world has had a lot of people with legislative ideas, but there's only one. There's only one who went and talked to God himself, who wrote with his finger on some stone tablets and gave him the revealed law. And our founding fathers put that guy right in the center. Moses is right in the center, right above the speaker's platform. They put Moses at the center of our legislative branch. How many people that live in here, that work in here, that pass laws that tell us we can't have 10 commandments at a courthouse? How many of those clowns even know what's above them? The very building they're in was designed to honor Moses, the lawgiver from the Bible. This is Supreme Court building, right across the street from the Capitol. You walk in there through the front door, and that's where all the judges sit, the 9 seats. Now this is looking out. You're not even in the room yet. There's some doors that are open. We're going to take a step back, and before you get to that place, there are these enormous doors. Huge oak doors, much, much taller than this ceiling. This wide for each door. I had read something before we visited there as a family 6 years ago or so, and I went to the security guard who was standing in this room, and I wanted him to pull back these red velvet ropes so we could close the door. I told him, listen, I've read that there is the Roman numerals 1 through 10 on those doors. Those doors were propped open. When a door gets propped open, the outside of it is up against the wall. You can't see it. And I wanted to look on those. The security guard told me, he said, sir, I've been working here 34 years. Nobody's ever asked me that. I've never seen the backside of these doors. Let's go do it. He was more excited than I was. We pull the red velvet ropes back and close it, and there's Roman numerals 1 through 5, 6 through 10 that represent the 10 Commandments. You can't get into the Supreme Court room. You can't get to where those judges sit without going through doors that have engraved on it the 10 Commandments. And what comes down from the people that sit there sometimes? What? Rulings that say, well, you can't have 10 Commandments. High school coaches can't pray with a football team. All kinds of goofy stuff. It gets worse. See these carved in the ivory up here? These are ancient Greek, Roman-looking people. Again, which way are these people looking? To the center. Which way are those people over there looking? They're looking at these two, these truth and justice figures. And when we blow these up, what's he leaning on? He's leaning on the actual stone tablets that have the 10 Commandments engraved on them. That sits straight above the head of our Chief Justice. Any lawyer that argues in front of the Supreme Court and the court tries to tell them that the Bible can't be taken certain places into the public sphere, those lawyers should just point, sir, would you please just look above your head? Because our founding fathers made it so it takes sandblasters to get this stuff off. That's in the ivory. It ain't coming off through wear, through erosion. It'll be there for time eternal until somebody does try to take the sandblasters, and we're about a couple years away from
You say those are ivory, not marble?
that. Hey, I don't know everything, pal. The President of the United States, George Washington, he got to appoint the first ever Supreme Court. That's what presidents do. They get to appoint, and the Senate ratifies them. The first guy Washington appointed as the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, was a guy named John Jay. John Jay was the founder and the president of the American Bible Society. It would be like appointing Billy Graham to the Chief Justice position of the Supreme Court. Washington did that. Do you know what the purpose of the American Bible Society was? They had one written statement: to diffuse Bibles in the English language throughout our culture. They raised money, printed Bibles, and transported them freely throughout the country.
And Congress paid for
Yes. Why? Why did they do that? So those guys knew that if the heart of man isn't reformed, if it's not converted, we got a tough time trusting that guy out there. If he doesn't think he's got to answer to a creator someday that made him, who's watching over his shoulder all the time, we're going to have a tough time with him in freedom. Think today, somebody who was president and founder of the American Bible Society, if they were nominated for the Supreme Court, they'd be mocked mercilessly, laughed at. George Washington, that's the one guy he picked. That man, John Jay, this is what he wrote. Providence, that's their way of talking about God. Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers. We get a vote. We get to pick who our leaders are. They're not kings and queens where they're born through heredity. And it is their duty. That word duty is kind of missing in the English language these days. Some military people know about it, but the rest of us, not so much. He said the citizenry has a duty to do what? To elect and prefer Christians for their rulers. I would love to hear one of our Supreme Court justices quote him. Say that. Watch the news media censor that out. He went out to tell the American public, you better vote for Christians. Now why? Because if they truly are, if they are a Christian, they get in the office. When that public treasury is there, they're going to be a little more careful about dipping into that thing when they know God's watching. Right across the building, across the street from the Supreme Court, this is the Library of Congress. I think this is the most ornate building on our continent. It's amazing. The marble, the sidewalk going in there is marble. The street is marble. The buses that pull up there, they let people out. They step out from Iowa and they step on marble and granite. It's unbelievable how expensive this is. You get inside, this is a staircase coming up to the next balcony level. Look how ornate that place is. See all the paintings and the writings? You start looking around here, well, it kind of looks like a cross up there. Some very expensive stuff, and these things are written over all the doorways. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. That's Proverbs 4, verse 7. The Library of Congress. It's the biggest library on our continent and almost the biggest in the world. At the center of it, the most celebrated exhibit that we have there is this right here. Anybody have any idea what's underneath there?
Gutenberg Bible.
Old man Gutenberg had a boy, and he printed some Bibles. Johannes Gutenberg in the 1450s invented the printing press. Why did he invent the press, and what was the first thing he printed? Printed the Bible. So that the common, everyday people could understand what God had told them. See, up until then, it was just written in Latin, and the thing was chained to the priest's podium. Only the priest could get in there and read it. And because of that, he could tell them anything he wanted. They had to take his word for it. And because of that, there got a lot of corruption, a lot of false teaching. When Gutenberg realized what was in the Bible, he invented the thing so he could print Bibles. 83 of them. There are 3 left on planet Earth. Our government, many years ago, went out and found and bought this one in mint condition. It's one of the originals. There's 3 left on Earth. And our government, so many years ago, decided that's the heart of our nation. That's where we came from. What were those people reading that crossed on those wooden boats with sails blowing them as pilgrims to get here? Why did they leave Europe? Because they were not allowed to even read that thing in their own language. In England, it was punishable by death in the 15 and 1600s to teach your child to say the Lord's Prayer in English. They came here for freedom of religion and expression. So much so that when they got here, and they started our government, what's the first thing our government, what's the first amendment, the first Bill of Rights?
Government shall make no law.
Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Congress shall make no law. Who is limited in that language?
Congress.
Am I, as an individual, do I have to go get permission to come talk to you guys about the Lord? Bible, biblical Christianity? I'm not limited by Congress shall make no law. Who's limited by that language? Congress. The Constitution was written to put a fence around who?
Congress. Citizens.
People in D.C. Not us. It protects us and our rights. What's the Second Amendment?
Guns.
You know that one, right?
Sweet, sweet
Somebody
guns.
quote it for me. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Infringed by who?
Government. But it is.
Oh, it is every year. But notice how they wrote the document. It shall not be infringed by the government. We don't, I don't go to your house and take your gun. If I do, there's already a law against that. I get thrown in jail for theft.
No, you
They
shot.
wrote that to keep the government from infringing upon your right that God gave you to defend yourself. They're all written that way. Think if we taught this in high schools.
Amen.
There is a group of people that would never, ever, ever, ever get elected again.
Yeah.
Ever. Constitution was written to protect these biblical freedoms, the Gutenberg Bible. Go to Arlington National Cemetery, across the Potomac, and there is this sign. It's a small sign, but I got chills when we went there just reading this thing. Welcome to Arlington National Cemetery, our nation's most sacred shrine. They protect that place because the 619 acres there, that's where we bury our most valuable. The people that die for us, that protect our freedom, our liberty.
Yes, sir.
Jesus said, no man hath greater love than this, than that he would lay down his life for his friends. And those people that do that for the rest of us, we put them here. And because of that, this is the most sacred ground that we have on this continent. And inside there is this place, the tomb of the unknown soldier. And of all the hallowed 619 acres, it's this one that is the most important out of those. Because we put an unnamed soldier, we don't even know his rank, we don't know anything about him. Doesn't matter, all we know is what he did for us. We honor his service, and because of that, we have people like this that walk up and down there 24 hours a day, every day of the year. They march in silence. And if you look close, you can see where their footprints have worn a place in the granite. Their shoes that they shine every day. They walk that thing over and over those 21 steps. They've done it for so long, so many years, they're wearing a place in the granite. And when this place back here, this is the museum that tells you all about it. And you walk in there and they'll have a little TV playing that gives a half-hour clip of the building of the Tomb of the Unknown. And what it tells you is there is a cornerstone to this building. And in that cornerstone, a time capsule, they put 4 things. They put a copy of the Declaration, a copy of the Constitution, a United States flag, and King James Bible. Our founding fathers thought that those 4 things were connected, that they supported each other, that those 4 things were not what we're told today, that separation of church and state. I mean, we got to keep that Bible separate. That's the second biggest lie in our culture. The founding fathers, they put all 4 of those things in one box because they support you. You can't have one without the other. The Declaration, the Constitution, the flag, and a Bible. The Washington Monument, at the center of DC, the center of the mall, this enormous thing, and it is gorgeous at night. That white just glows with all the light shining on it. It's 555 feet high. By law, nothing in that city can even approach it in height. That's why there's no skyscrapers in DC, none. By law, they started, said nothing gets higher, nothing even gets close to this thing. For a reason. When this thing was being built, Washington was so popular, the rest of the countries around the world all bought, donated, and they sailed it across the oceans to get here, these enormous blocks of stone to help build that thing. You can go inside there and see where Ethiopia and the Sudan and Bolivia and China, all these different places donated stones they wanted their name associated with
Freedom.
George Washington, who was synonymous with freedom. You get to the top of that thing, 555 feet up in the air. See how it comes to a point? There is a copper capstone on there. And engraved on that, pointing up to God himself, is a Latin phrase, Laus Deo, which means praise be to God. When God looks down on his city, he sees his own name. When we went there 6 years ago, I got teary-eyed. Because I always associated that town with the politicians that I hated. Every American should be required to spend 2 weeks on a tour there. To go read the Bible verses, the biblical references in every monument, in every single place that is built there. It will change you. Because our country was built around God. Without question.
It's amazing how they got those big pieces thrown up there.
Thomas Jefferson Memorial. There's this water, huge lake area out in front. Walkway where people are standing and these steps that go up there. This is, the sun is going down and you can see the lights on it. It just glows. It's gorgeous. You can see sky all the way through it because it's open. You go through those pillars and you can see somebody standing in there. That's Jefferson's statue. And around inside of there are 4 speeches. The 4 most important things that guy ever said or he ever wrote. Now before I click to show you a closer version of this, I want you to keep something in mind. What do we all know about, what are we told about Jefferson today?
He's a slave owner to the deeds.
Yeah, he's a slave owner, which is why we can't listen to him. He certainly wasn't a Christian, didn't really hardly believe it. He maybe believed in God, but God didn't have anything to do with our daily lives. I mean, that's what we're told. These are the speeches, the things that he wrote. We've already looked at one, what he wrote for the Declaration. It talks about our Creator. How God intended for us to live in freedom. We'll come back to that one. This is another one. I don't know how those guys got it wrong, but somehow they got it wrong. I mean, the first word is God. God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. See how Jefferson's thought process works? God formed us, he created us, and then what did he do once he created us? Gave us liberty. That's his intent for his creation. And can the liberties of a nation be secure when, or what that would read today is if we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God. I'm going to read that again. Can the liberties of a nation be secure if we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? What he's saying is, you ever let it get in your kids, your grandkids, the next future generations? You ever let it get inside their heart that the liberty comes from government, comes from their parents, comes from the Russians? You're dead. The only sure security for liberty is that the liberties come from God. If we lose that, if we think that Lincoln or DC gives us our liberty, it's over. But he didn't believe in God, right? That's what they tell us. There's literally nothing that we hear that's truth anymore. Keep reading this. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. What's he talking about? He explains in the next sentence. Commerce between master and slave is despotism.
That's good.
Don't understand that.
Commerce between, what's commerce between master and slave? There really isn't commerce.
No.
Commerce is, I like your plow, I want to buy it, and let's voluntarily exchange. You give it to me on the agreed upon price. Between slave and master, there is no bargaining. He forces it on him. And he says that kind of commerce between master and slave is despotism. I thought he loved slavery. I mean, he's a slave owner, right? When Thomas Jefferson was 14 years old, his dad died. And he inherited those slaves. And by Virginia colonial law, he could not set them free unless he had a certain amount of money to pay for what the law said he had to turn them free with. He couldn't do it. That's never taught in school. Washington was 11. When his dad died, he inherited his slaves. Give me 5 minutes in your high school.
What is despotism?
Despotism is tyranny. Notice what Jefferson's saying here. He's trembling for America with the thought that, my God, we've got slavery here, and someday God's justice is coming. He was scared for our country because we had slavery. The guy was a lawyer. The first case he ever had, defended a slave for his freedom. Thomas Jefferson was an absolute genius. The idea that we tear down his statues today, can't go down that rabbit trail. Let's go back to the Declaration. Before we do, this is worth it. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the thing that we have today is not his original draft. He came up with the original draft, submitted to all the people, and there were some people from South Carolina and Georgia that found something they didn't like in there. And they would not sign up to go fight with everybody against Great Britain unless they removed it, and that was this. The first thing that Jefferson listed as a reason we're pulling away from Great Britain. The King of Great Britain, he said, you won't let us free our slaves. Every time we've tried it, every one of our colonial legislatures that have passed laws, you, as the king over there, because we were under British rule, the Parliament and the king vetoed those laws. Why would they do that? Who controlled all the cotton, corn, beans, tobacco that was raised here? Great Britain did. So they wanted as much produced as possible. But the people over here, a lot of them wanted to end it. And they passed laws to end slavery. But the king always nullified those. And so Jefferson said, here's one reason we're pulling away. You will not let us end slavery. And I don't have it on here, I wish I did. The writing, the language of it. Because Jefferson called it an execrable commerce. Now, I think I'm in a rural enough area. I'm from Thayer County. We got a lot of horses, cattle, ranch. It's open country. We know what excrement is down there. I imagine you do here. Jefferson said to the king, personally to the king, what you're doing with slavery is excrement. That's the word he used. I think the guy was kind of against slavery. But Georgia and South Carolina said we're not going along with that. And they made them take it out if they wanted their help in fighting Great Britain, so they did. And they looked to future generations to finally end slavery. And unfortunately, they came within one vote of doing it. And the thing then turned and went down the wrong road until a guy named Abraham Lincoln came along. He happened to be the first ever Republican. Okay, that's one reason I'm a Republican today.
Amen.
Oh, yeah.
We are the party of freedom, of liberty, of ending slavery. That fact will never be taught in high school. You get halfway through the Declaration of Independence, and this is what it says. We are appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. We are appealing to the supreme judge of the world. That's a fancy way of saying God. We're telling God, we're trying to create something here that gives freedom to mankind. And we are appealing to him for the rectitude of our intentions. That means the rest of the world, whatever you think about us, you want to start war with us? Fine. We're doing this and we're letting God judge us. We're appealing to his opinion of what we're doing here. Our intentions are going to be judged by God. That's in our Declaration of Independence. You see, our founders made a covenant with that guy. That we're starting this based on your principles. And we're appealing to you. You watch over us. You judge us. Because our intentions are wide open to you. He knows everything, people. We can't hide. Williamsburg, Virginia. Before the federal government existed, the capital of Virginia was Williamsburg. And that was the biggest colony. That's where Jefferson, Washington, all these people were at the capital. Well, because of travel on a horse, you didn't go home for the weekend. You stayed there for months. And while they're doing their legislative work, this is where they went to church. The Bruton Parish. It's the longest, the oldest serving church on the continent. Since the 1600s, that thing has never closed. And this is where they went to church. You walk inside there, and you see these places where you can go in like a pew, only it's different. It's a box. You walk inside there, there's a bench on that side and a bench on this side. You sat down and you sat across from the person looking at your family member or your neighbor as you listened to the sermon up there. There wasn't any falling asleep. There wasn't doing your grocery list or checking your watch. You looked into the eyes of your neighbor while they preached the sermon. And if you'll notice, there's something written on the sides here. General George. George Washington's family sat in this pew box. Thomas Jefferson family and friends that he might have had visiting sat in this pew box. Patrick Henry and Paul Carrington sat in this pew box. And when you go to the back of this church, there is a bronze plaque that they have put up against the wall. And this is what it says. They did this a couple decades after the founding fathers all died away. And the people that were their relatives that were still around, they wanted to honor them. And they wrote these words down. That they came here. This is what the plaque says. They came here to the church to find a clearer vision and a nobler courage. What gave those guys guts to stand up against Great Britain? Reading the Bible. They literally thought God would step in and help them. How did they see clear enough to recognize how man should live? How did God create us? They got that stuff from being in church. They came here to find a clearer vision and a nobler courage, and to invoke upon their cause the blessing of their God and the God of their fathers. Is that just poetry? They just kind of roll off the tongue, sounds good. I mean, they don't really expect God's going to step in and help them, do they?
That's faith.
I mean, they're not lunatics. That's exactly right. That's faith. I want to ask anybody in here a question. Have you ever knowingly stepped in harm's way and did so with confidence because you thought, well, God will help me? These guys did. That's why I usually cry when I talk about these guys. They stepped out, put their lives in danger and the lives of their family. It's one thing if I want to step in front of a bullet to put my wife and my 7 kids in that position. You're going to have a lot of faith. And they were convinced that the blessing of their God and of the God of their fathers would be invoked upon them. Why? Because they were following his dictates from the Word to create the nation of America. You may think, John, you're making a little too much out of that. I think I don't think those guys really thought that. It just sounds good when it's put to pen and paper. Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson are the two guys that are always talked about today as founding fathers. There's a reason for that. Because the people that want to tear them down and destroy them, they tell us that they are the two most irreligious, the two guys that they for sure didn't believe in God. We've already saw what Jefferson wrote. He talked about God and everything. Ben Franklin, he was just an inventor. He didn't believe in God, right? Old man. Very, very aged man. When the average life expectancy was 37, this guy was 81 at the Constitutional Convention. They were having trouble arguing out what are we going to do, how are we going to develop this country. And Ben Franklin stood up one day and said, I have lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. Did they think God was involved? To the point that Franklin, the guy that supposedly everybody tells us he doesn't even care about God, he stands up and he asks, I therefore beg to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning. The one guy who's a deist or an atheist, he stands up and says, before we do anything in here, we bring a clergyman in here and we pray that God would direct us as we argue this thing out. Now in that speech, it's kind of a long one. I want you to notice how many biblical references, if you know your Bible, a lot of this will ring familiar. He said that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, Jesus said, a sparrow can't fall to the ground. God has the very hairs of your head numbered. If a sparrow can't fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it. That's a direct Bible quote. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. What's he talking about, builders of Babel? Genesis. The Tower of Babel. And this goes on and on. There are 13 Bible references that this guy gave in a very short speech asking that we bring a clergyman in here and pray before we start hammering this Constitution out. And they all agreed to it. They agreed to it. They split up, went home for a couple weeks, fasted and prayed. And when they came back, you know what they created? The biggest miracle on planet Earth. Our Constitution. It's not by accident. The thing that we have on this earth, people, it's worth fighting for. It's the reason we down in Thayer County started up our chapter again after many years. It's why I'm here tonight. I'll go anywhere they open the door to let me in to talk about the Founding Fathers. Were they perfect? Of course not. We don't judge people by whether or not they're perfect. You can be quite a bit less than perfect and still be good. What these people gave us is a miracle. And if we throw it away, you are going to have to spend your sunset years putting your grandchild on your lap saying, let me tell you what it was like when America was free. I'm not willing to do that. I'll go anywhere they let me talk about this. Patrick Henry, everybody knows his speech. If you are in your 70s in here, or 80s, there's a chance you were required or asked to memorize his Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech in high school. I've met a lot of people that told me that they were in their one-room schoolhouse. Americans used to have to memorize it. We all know how it ends. It ends with, I don't know what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And dang it, that puts the goosebumps on you. You can't help but get a clenched fist and say, let's go get them. But there's something that came before that. Before Henry got to that part, said, besides, sir, he's trying to implore, he is giving this speech in St. John's Church in Virginia. And he's asking the congregation, we have to go fight. And he said, besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations, and who will raise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Where do Americans get their vigilance, their actions, and their bravery? Because throughout our history, we look across the oceans and we see tyranny. What do? We go crush it. Because God intended for mankind to live how?
Free.
In freedom. We don't even know those people. When my dad was asked to go to Vietnam, I don't think he could locate it on a map. He probably couldn't spell Vietnam. Why would he go?
Duty.
Because of what all Americans have done. The duty to crush oppression. We live by a certain creed here. And in America, after we crushed tyranny, think of what we did to Germany and Japan in World War II. I mean, crushed it. At the end of World War II, we're the only nation that had the atomic bomb. We could have taken any piece of property. We could have taken Moscow. We're the only ones that got it. I want you to think with me, what would Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, what would Stalin have done with that weapon? He would have blackmailed the world for everything. What did the Americans do? We put our boys on transport ships and sent them home. Then we sent money across to rebuild Japan and Germany. No man has greater love than that he lay down his life for his friends. It was the Christian religion in our culture that made us do that. You cannot open any history book and find where another nation has conquered somebody and rebuilt it. Doesn't exist. Except here. God would step in and fight our battles for us. And this is one of the best symbols of our nation, the Liberty Bell. This thing was cast a long, long time ago. This is in Philadelphia, where they signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That thing hangs there now. This huge crack in it happened when for Washington's 100th birthday. They were going to ring that thing just as a ceremony. They got this big crack in it. Since then, it hasn't rung since. So they put it on display basically like a museum. If you had really, really good vision, you might be able to see that there's some writing. If you get a little closer, the writing starts to show, and the resolution in here isn't all that good. Here's what this is. LEV dot. LEV right there. Roman numeral 2510. You have your Bibles here. I tell you to open up to Leviticus. LEV. Leviticus 25:10 says that you shall proclaim liberty throughout the nation, throughout all the land. You see, in ancient Israel, every 50 years they had this year of Jubilee, and God told them, you set everybody free. Whoever's in debt, forgiven. And every 50th year was hallowed as a year of freedom, liberty. And our founding fathers got the idea that we would proclaim liberty. See, when you proclaim it, that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to speak loud. Let it go far and broad. And that's why they put it in the form of a bell. When you ring that thing, the sound of it, the vibration goes throughout the airwaves out to everybody. Let everybody know that our freedom, the Liberty Bell, where did it even get its idea, its inception? I mean, you guys read Leviticus every night before you go to bed, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah. How many people even know that Leviticus 25:10 talks about telling the whole land about liberty? The founding fathers did. And that's where they got the idea to even associate liberty with a bell. Leviticus. It's the last sentence in the Declaration. We started at the beginning. Was we hold these truths to be self-evident, that God created us, and that He intended for us to have life living in pursuit of happiness. This is how it ends. And for the support of this declaration. What do they mean, support? What they mean is if we just write this thing out and hand it to the king, is he just going to let us go free? No, we're going to have to fight for this. We're going to have to support the words we're writing with action. For the support of this declaration, comma, with a firm reliance on what? The protection of divine providence. In other words, they're expecting help from where? I get goosebumps every time I do this. And I'll ask you the same question I asked you 20 minutes ago. Have you ever put your life on the line and expected God to step in and save you? Because these guys did. They signed their names to this. Our country's origin ends with these words. That to support this declaration with a firm reliance. That means we're not just going to dip our toes in the water and see if it works. We're burning the bridges behind us and we're going toward liberty. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. You know why they were willing to go after the British, even against their own countrymen who were in favor of the British? They thought God was on their side. And that's what I have to ask you. What would you do if you thought God was on your side? Because I can tell you what we're starting to do down in Thayer County. We started a group just like this. And that's the only reason you know about me. I started doing stuff like this because it's my passion. It's my heart. It's what gets me going. These men put their lives on it where they were willing to die for it because they thought God was on their side. There's way too many on our side of the aisle that think, oh, I mean, it's so far down the road, we can't bring it back. It's going over the abyss. Nothing's impossible with God. Even if it was, it's still worth fighting for. We're not just going to kneel down and turn this thing over. We fight the way these guys fought. First thing they did is they wrote their ideas and let the world know about it. Republicans had better be able to articulate what we believe. Freedom and liberty in all areas of life.
Yes.
Because the world out there needs to hear it. If they don't, if it gets extinguished here, people, where are we going to run to? There's nowhere left to go. God gave us something here. And I expect Him on Judgment Day to ask me, what did I do with it? Did I sit there and watch this thing go down the tubes and do nothing about it, not even stand up and speak, not even give my voice? I've never even shed blood over this. All I've done is get a little bit of a dry throat. What can we do with God on our side? Because see, you may read this and you think, well, that was nice, but did they really put that into practice? 6 weeks after they signed this, at the end of August 1776, Washington is backed up on Long Island in New York. He's trapped. The British are on the land. If he crosses the river going back to the continent, and the British have all the ships, they're the biggest navy in the world, they have him blockaded. And the ships are arriving with new troops and supplies every day. And Washington is sitting there with almost no supplies and a third of the men, and he's staring out of the ocean. And he's looking totally despondent. His underlings thinks he's giving up. Why wouldn't he? There's no chance. They can't get off this island. And as he stares out of the ocean, Lieutenant Talmadge, the guy in charge of his intelligence, comes and says, "Sir," and he recounts the facts. He says, "What are we going to do?" And Washington gave him 9 words. We will rely on the protection of divine providence. And that night, the British didn't attack.